Welcome to the White and Blue Podcast. I'm Doug Goodnow, and my co-host is Colleen McGinnis. We are here to tell the interesting stories of Hillsdale College alumni, or more accurately, help them share their own stories. Here's a little bit about today's guest.
Erin Davis Valdez has had a long, successful career in public policy, spending the last few years with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, where she worked with the governor's office and state legislature in shaping education policy. She recently started a new position as the executive director for the Center for Education and Public Service for the University of Austin, a startup private institution. Erin, thank you for joining us today. We're so glad to have you.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Doug.
All right. So I've had the pleasure of getting to know you for 4, 5, 6 years or so.
Something like
on
that.
On the alumni board, and you're the rising president of the alumni board. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
We'll talk more about that later. But maybe tell us, first of all, what how you arrived. You're originated in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find Hillsdale? What's your Hillsdale story?
That's a great question. My family homeschooled me all the way through K-12. We started out in Florida, and we moved to Texas in 1990. My parents were voracious readers. Neither of them went to college, but they were self-taught. They read all the time. I went to volunteer at a local library as part of my high school. My parents told me I had to volunteer somewhere, so that's what I did. And my dad loved to listen to Rush Limbaugh, and Rush used to talk about National Review magazine all the time and how much he admired Bill Buckley. And so that got me thinking, well, maybe I should check this National Review out. And since I worked at the library, I had access to the magazines as they came in every 2 weeks, as it was back then. And I read them cover to cover, and Buckley would talk a lot about Hillsdale. He knew a lot of classical allusions. He peppered his speech with long Latin-based words, and that got me thinking maybe I should learn some Latin too. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, we subscribed to Imprimis, and I learned about Hillsdale and decided that I would like to get a little farther away from home than I'd been growing up. And so visited, fell in love with the place, even though it was February, and that's how I got here.
That's a great story.
Well, you've been involved in writing public policy, shaping public policy. Tell us about that path of how you got first involved in that.
That is a really good question. I didn't start out wanting to get into policy. Obviously, as a Hillsdale student, I was exposed to a lot of the big questions, a lot of the political philosophical questions of the day. So I was interested in it, but it wasn't what drove me. I wanted to be a teacher. And so I got a master's degree in Latin and Greek at University of California at Santa Barbara. And then I went back home essentially to teach at a little classical school in Georgetown, Texas, Grace Academy, where I had it was a formative experience. I realized how much I didn't know about teaching. So had a lot of learning to do on the job. I taught in classical schools in the Austin area for about 9-10 years. We moved to the Louisville area in 2014, which is in the DFW Metroplex, which is about 3 hours from Austin. And I knew I needed to get a job up there, and I had been connected to some of the Barney Charter School efforts. So I reconnected there. They had an opening at a school, Founders Classical Academy in Louisville, and I became the assistant headmaster there. It was a wonderful experience. Very greatly admire the headmaster there, still a good friend of mine. And it just sort of started to hit me because I'd been teaching in private schools up to that point, and the transition to a public charter school, it was a different population of students. And yet the transformation was still there. The students were still learning and drinking deeply from the tradition. It was transforming their lives, and it was transforming their families' lives too. You could see the different path that they were on as a result of having chosen that school. And so that really got me thinking about the public policy questions about why can't all students have access to this kind of education? Why is this just the few students who got lucky enough to win the lottery, literally, that got into this school? And right about the same time, it's funny how God works. It was the first year that National Review had started their regional fellows program in the Dallas area. And I found out about it on Twitter. So I just shot off an email and said, hey, we're here. We'd like to apply. My husband and I got in that first cohort, and we were exposed to, 8 weeks of different seminar style discussions with a variety of their speakers and a lot of their writers. And it was very public policy focused, but with an emphasis on the conservative intellectual tradition. And I just decided, you know what? This is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. So I essentially forced the coordinator to be my friend and said, I want you to mentor me, tell me what I need to know, what should I be looking for, how can I change paths into this pathway? And she's a wonderful woman who helped me out, still a good friend. And so, yeah, she showed me a couple different places to look. And before you know it, I had a new position at the Charles Koch Foundation in Arlington, Virginia, where I helped lead their K-12 portfolio. And as a result of that, I got exposed to a lot of the policy questions in states, every single state, essentially. You learn a lot just by doing that job and traveling and seeing schools, seeing what's going on in the space and what could be done better, essentially. And so from there, that was a ton of travel. Wanted to kind of get back to the Austin area. Texas Public Policy Foundation had an opening. And so I applied and I got it. And from there, I started working more directly with the legislature in Texas. And it was a wonderful experience. Got to do a lot of research, writing, speaking. And so all of these things coming together, I feel very, very blessed to still be in the education space, but seeing it from different vantage points. And so I got here.
So that was a sort of circuitous route, but
yes,
doing what you're doing impacts education, obviously.
Yes.
And you've been working in and with and then defending education for your whole career, which is fabulous. You are doing it now more in the vein of policy. And would you describe, were you always a sort of quote unquote policy wonk? Did you always have that passion? Would you call yourself that?
No, I didn't. And I think that's the thing that when I'm talking to current Hillsdale students or recent graduates or even people who've been out for a little while, you hit on it very well. I try to say you don't have to know what you want to do when you grow up, right? Hillsdale prepares you no matter what. I majored in classics. I got a great preparation for a life that isn't directly as involved with classics anymore. And I just say, you shouldn't follow the path that you think made somebody else happy. Sometimes what you end up doing isn't the template you had, but it's what God wanted you to do. And so you have to listen to that, and you have to be courageous enough to take those steps, even if it feels scary. And you should try things. So when I took the job at Texas Public Policy Foundation, I took it in the middle of session. It was February. Session was already underway. And I had to jump right in, meeting with lawmakers, helping draft policies, helping draft research into a whole new policy space that I had no idea, and I just had to drink from the fire hose, so to speak, and start out in a position that I didn't know much and be okay with that. And that takes... That can feel sometimes, I think, to people like a step backwards, especially if you're, mid-career-ish, to say, hey, well, why should I have to take this learning role? But I'm so grateful that I did. As hard as it was wonderful. I got to work with some amazing people. TPPF is helping to lead the effort for school choice in Texas, which is the big enchilada, as we say down there. Hopefully will happen this upcoming legislative session. And that'll be a game changer, I think, for students in the whole country.
You talked about all the policy experiences you've had. Is there one specific one that you really feel either proud about or is very memorable in your past?
Testifying before the legislature is at first a very daunting experience, and it should always be daunting because you take an oath before you testify, that you're not going to misrepresent the facts and that you're going to tell the truth. And that always, is something that struck me, and I took that very seriously. I think you get more comfortable with it as you do it more often, just like anything else in life. Last session, we worked on a bill, HB 1605, that helped to essentially make high-quality instructional materials more available to students in public schools across Texas. A lot of these materials are essentially based on the core knowledge sequence, which isn't explicitly classical, but it has a lot of similarities with the classical sequence and model. And since I had worked in a school that used some of those materials, I was able to testify about how, as a teacher, these kinds of resources would have made my life a lot easier, that I wouldn't have to be creating worksheets on the fly, that I would have those supplied to me and they would be appropriate and they would be grade level and they would help students to be challenged. and not bored. And so I felt really good about being able to speak from my direct personal experience on that bill, which passed and is currently being implemented. And I'm super excited about that. I actually got to visit a school out in Amarillo a few weeks ago, public school that serves a very, very challenged population of students. There's a meat packing plant out in Amarillo. As you might imagine, it's a place that has a lot of cattle. And so the folks that work at the meat packing plant, they're all legal immigrants that are sponsored by the company. And they come from all over the world. They come from Somalia. They come from Yemen. They come from just a lot of countries. A lot of them are Muslim countries. And their kids are often home all day by themselves because they're shift workers. And so this school, as you can imagine, is just, the needs these kids have when they come into the school, they're not even literate in their own home language, much less in English. And so the reason that was such a powerful experience for me was because that school had been using the same sort of core knowledge sequence that we had used when I was at Founders, with some modifications and a few changes here and there. And they had also been pairing that with a strong phonics program and a strong math program. And they were kind of one of the pilot schools for this. And they were having incredible results with these students. The thing that hit home for me was at the very end of that tour, I was there with a state senator and a candidate. They had 3 students speak to us. One of them spoke to us about how, she had learned to love to read English and how she had really acquired a love for that through reading things like To Kill a Mockingbird and things like that. She presented to us how that had changed her life. A young man presented to us a story from history that he found very interesting. It was a Civil War story. And when the state senator asked him, who's your favorite founding father? This young man, I chuckled, said Thomas Jefferson, which is, even in my world, a controversial choice sometimes to say. And what that really hit home to me was schools, when they are committed to helping students learn and they don't have low expectations for them, and they've got good materials that are rooted in the truth and that aren't based on a false narrative about American history, they can learn to love the country that they're in. And I felt so much hope walking out of there. We just need more of that. We need more schools with great materials. We need more school choice. We need parents to be able to find those options. And when those things are all in place, I think the future is actually pretty bright.
That sounds fantastic. So thank you for your work.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So your current role, which is still fairly new to you,
Yes.
And I'm sure there will still be a lot of figuring out because it sounds like you're in a startup situation. But what is the vision? What is the, if you're able to achieve the development of this program the way that you all want, which I'm sure you will, what will it look like?
That's a great question. So I just begun a new position at the University of Austin. The University of Austin is a startup private institution based in Austin. Currently has some space downtown. It's a beautifully renovated old department store building. The University of Austin was started because of the need that there is to create new institutions in higher education. So you've seen a lot of stagnation. You've seen a lot of decay and decadence, frankly, in the space. The founders wanted to push back on that and create a space where there's actually meaningful seeking of truth in a context where people didn't have to worry about being canceled and didn't have to worry about saying the wrong thing or tripping over, some sort of sacred cow. In light of that, University of Austin has started starting an intellectual foundations core program that will take the students through 2 years of reading great books and being in dialogue with one another. After that, they'll get into their major or their concentration. And so the center that we're incubating currently is called the Center for Education and Public Service. So the idea is that students will have essentially 3 concentrations to kind of choose from. There'll be pedagogy, which, imagine would be for future teachers, education entrepreneurship, and education policy, all 3 of which are areas that I have a lot of passion for. And so to be able to bring those together is super exciting. The thing that sets University of Austin apart is that there will be sort of a kind of a it's a North Star. It's a Polaris project. That's literally what it is. From the beginning, students will find a project that they're passionate about, that's meaningful to them, and they'll essentially use that to guide their studies through the 4 years they're there. So yes, they'll go through the core curriculum, but they'll also be working with a mentor network of people who are working in that area. They'll also be working with folks that can connect them, either if they're trying to start a business to capital, to help them develop business plans, things of that nature. Once they get into their concentrations, they'll have even more time to work on that. And so the idea is a student could come in and say, hey, you know what, my Polaris project is I want to start a school. And so they could spend that 4 years getting immersed in the core curriculum and then come into the center that we're getting started and say, all right, let's get the right classes under my belt. Let's connect that to the core. Let's talk to folks in the Austin area who are doing that. And beyond the Austin area, the idea is to connect them to the best experts in the country to help them refine and execute that vision. Could also be things like, hey, I'd like to pass a bill that does X because I see this need. Okay, well, that'd be policy. And then you could also see teachers who come in and say, hey, we need a better Latin curriculum. I want to create a better Latin curriculum. Or, hey, there isn't a good translation of this Greek text. I'd like to spend 4 years figuring that out because the market says we need a better translation. So you can see how in each of those areas, students are going to have an access to both the best in the business, but also a core network of people around them to support them and help them execute that. So that's what I'm excited about. The center brings together those three strands in a way that I hope that students will find beneficial. Oftentimes when students are in schools of education, they spend a lot of time on theory and it's not very useful. And they end up kind of like me, and they end up in the classroom and don't really know what they're doing. So the idea would be if they're going into the teaching track, we would work with local schools to have immediate practica essentially so that they could be immersed basically from the time that they start in teaching and assisting teachers and seeing how schools actually work.
So starting a school would be the educational entrepreneurship
Potentially could also be something like they want to start an app that teaches phonics or it could be honestly anything that in the entrepreneurial space that's also educational could be there. Could be something, it could be almost anything that you can imagine. That's the idea, is that we're entering an era, hopefully, as school choice spreads, where we're going to have a whole lot of new players in the game who are going to be reinventing education.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
So that the first class basically, your freshman class you have right now basically is the first year.
Yeah, the class is starting in August and they'll do their first 2 years. That'll be complete in 26. The idea would hopefully be that the center would be up and running by the fall of that year so that they could enter into that school at that time. So that's what we're shooting for right now.
This sounds right up your alley. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm super excited about it. We're gonna learn as we go, but it's going to be fun because we're going to try to bring the right people together to make this happen.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a break and be right back with the White and Blue Podcast.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now. Or text the word Imprimis to 71844 and we'll send you a link to sign up for your free lifetime subscription. That's IMPRIMIS to 71844.
Now it's time for the Hillsdale History Minute, where we bring a slice of Hillsdale College history to the White and Blue Podcast. The Paul House, a current women's dormitory across from Broadlawn, was purchased by Lorenzo Dow and his wife in 1918. The Paul family then bought it in 1948 before it officially was owned by the college. It then served as the Alpha Xi Delta sorority house until the early 2000s. It was then converted into a women's dormitory and has remained so ever since. Welcome back to the White and Blue podcast. We're here with Erin Davis Valdez, who is starting a new position, we should say, with the Center for Education and Public Service for the University of Austin. Erin, you talked about, the excitement of being able to do something new, something different. Taking that leap with a startup university, I think we were talking earlier, there's not a whole lot of new colleges and universities starting up. So tell me about that process and how that affected, your thought process as you were moving through.
That is exactly right. When University of Austin wanted to get started, you have to complete, many hoops that you have to jump through. Which is actually a policy issue that we can talk more about later. But from the purely practical standpoint, they had to get through the first hoop, which was state authorization. And really all that means is the state needed to be able to give them a seal of approval, and the state had to say, okay, we're saying you're a real college, you're not fly by night, and that you are going to be seeking accreditation. They didn't really have a blueprint for this, because I think what I heard was the last university, the truly new university that got started in Texas was in the 70s. There have been expansions from the state universities of different campuses, but they're not truly new universities, if that makes any sense. So they kind of had to go through a process nobody really in living memory had any idea of how to go through. They did so successfully. In November, they got their certificate of authority from the state, which allowed them to be able to do two really important things. One was to actually be able to call themselves a university, which they could not do before November of 23. So they went from being UATX to being the University of Austin. Second really important thing that allowed them to do was to start recruiting students. So they actually got started a little bit behind the game recruiting this current year's class of students, because they couldn't start until November of 23. But they were ready, hit the ground running, and just been doing a lot of recruiting up till now. And just, talking to some of the folks in that department, it's been a student-by-student recruitment effort. They're shooting for 100 students to start with. They're fully scholarshiping all of the students. And the reason for that is because they won't be accredited when those students graduate. To get accreditation, you actually have to graduate students first, which is very strange. Our accreditation system is very messed up. So these students are the kind of bold, kind of outside the box thinking students that are like, you know what, that's okay. I'm going to go there for the education only, knowing that this isn't going to be an accredited school the first year that they graduate students, which I think is going to lead to a really eclectic and fun mix of students. I really can't wait to see who they are. And I can't wait to meet them. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, there are a lot of regulatory hurdles to getting it started. I was reading a piece by a friend of mine, Preston Cooper, in Education Next recently, and he wrote a profile of the University of Austin, and he really made an excellent point, which is that University of Austin it's meant to be a sort of a beacon to others to say, hey, this isn't going to solve all the problems. We need many more new institutions. The old institutions are failing. They're not living up to the promise that we hope that they'll have in higher education. It's not a coincidence that we see Gen Z really, really disillusioned with higher education. And so that there need to be new alternatives that can spark again the love of learning and the core reason that we have higher education.
So for you, I mean, it's somewhat of a risk, although
Yes.
It sounds like they really have done the work at the planning and are prepared to do this. So you're going into a less stable job environment, so to speak. But it sounds to me like it's a real mission and calling for you.
That's how I would put it. Nothing is for sure, especially when you're dealing with something like this, where you're kind of at the whim of accreditors. You're at the whim of a lot of third parties that you can't control. There's going to be an element of risk. But the great thing is, and what I've really come to learn and appreciate, University of Austin is 3 blocks south of where Texas Public Policy Foundation is. So I actually know a lot of the folks, and it's kind of an interesting mix of community there. What I've come to find out is that they've got the right people, and they've got the right vision, and that there are a lot of people coming alongside to support.
Yeah.
So I feel very good about where they're at in terms of the team. So yeah, of course, anything's possible. But I think with knowing what I know, I'm pretty confident that it's going to be successful, and I hope to do my part to make it that way.
And we were chatting a couple days ago about the landscape in higher education right now, and I'm no expert, but I know a lot of schools are struggling, to kind of stay afloat. But then they have these programs in schools like this, starting like the Hamilton Center in Florida and University of Austin. Of course, there's Hillsdale and what its new work in K-12 and that kind of thing. But I don't know if you've seen more of that, or if you think we're kind of on the cusp of a movement here in higher ed. It sounds like you kind of alluded to that earlier.
It's funny, the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is usually a very unfriendly outlet to anything innovative or even slightly traditional. They don't like either one, came out with a piece just recently, and I think the title was, "Can Republicans Save Higher Education?" which I just found hilarious because it's so reductive to just, it's
not just a Republican.
It's not a Republican thing. It's not a partisan thing, but they want to make it that way. That's the way they want to frame the narrative. So the hilarious thing is that you have governors in states like Florida and Arizona and Texas, and they're starting these centers at public institutions like the Hamilton Center, like the Civitas Center and at UT. Arizona has a great center out there at ASU as well. And what they're doing is they're bringing scholars who love the tradition, that is the intellectual tradition of the West, together. They're essentially sparking a liberal arts school within the school. And the folks that have been crying about the death of humanities and how all the professors are getting hired and all the programs are closing are starting to realize actually the salvation for the humanities is to return to the purpose of the humanities. And that's what's happening. And it was so funny because the piece was so concerned about, well, what's the ideological bent of these people that are saving the humanities? And I'm like, as if the other side doesn't have an ideological bent. But it was very interesting. And so I think there is it's not a backlash and it's not even a reaction. It's just a natural, it's in our souls, right, to want to seek the truth. And I think those people have been out there. They've always been out there, and they've got some institutional support now. They've got the right patrons, as we would say, to make the vision happen. So I do see some hope for higher education. I see a lot of schools are going to be closing because of the demographic crisis, or, cliff, as they say. But they're not closing just because there are fewer students. They're closing because they lost their mission. And so the schools and the sub-departments within schools that are reclaiming a mission, they're the ones that are going to thrive because that's what attracts students. And so I think Hillsdale's a perfect example of that. Never had a problem with students applying here because they're attracted to the mission and it's clearly articulated. And so I do see a little bit of a sea change happening, and I'm excited to see what the next 10 years will bring. I'm actually very optimistic.
Well, yeah, and we've had a huge boon in the last 5 to 10 years on our admissions, and especially this last year, the most applications we've received, I think, in history. So that would back up your optimism for sure. Absolutely.
Staying on the Hillsdale topic, as Colleen mentioned earlier, you're I like that term, rising president of our alumni board. Talk about, kind of your vision for the alumni board and your experience in it, because obviously you've served as vice president and in other roles since your time.
So, first of all, I have been so grateful to the college for the education that I received. I had to come here on scholarship. My family really didn't have the money to send me here. And so from that standpoint, I'm starting with gratitude. And that's really what I want to see the Alumni Association board embody. I want to see everyone who's participating in it display that both to the college and to their fellow alumni. We have an opportunity to be different than other alumni associations that are often in place because they have access to grind or their own agendas or things of that nature. I think Hillsdale's alumni board is and can be different, and I want to see that continue. Since I started on the board in 2017, I've served on the Career Services Subcommittee, which has given me an excellent opportunity to work with that team, Career Services, and now with Business and Industry, and to actually get to talk with a lot of alums that are looking to change careers. The reason that I wanted to serve was I was in the middle of my own career transition, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if more mid-career professionals had a network to say, hey, reach out to, hey, I'm doing this right now, but I want to transition to this career. What are your ideas? How can I do that? That would have been very helpful to me. And so I saw that need, and that's the reason I pursued the opportunity to join the board. And I saw that come more and more into fruition, working with that subcommittee and seeing the college taking that on in a very serious way. So that's been very meaningful. I don't think career is everything, but I do think it's important to the college's mission to help their alumni connect with meaningful work in their lives and to carry on the mission of the college in that way. And of course, that supports all the other things that the college cares about, family formation and community and things of that nature. So I'm excited about this opportunity to lead the board, and I'm excited about the team that we have. I love working with you and Colleen on this, and just I hope that we can continue to keep the spirit of gratitude and the spirit of just celebration of what we have in the past and what we can accomplish in the future.
Well, we'll certainly try. And again, Ron, to point out quickly, we have an affinity group for education that you've really helped get going. We have a LinkedIn page out there, and we do a quarterly email newsletter. So David Bassett, our Director of Alumni Engagement, has helped coordinate that, but you've certainly been a key person in getting that going, and we've got it rolling pretty good right now.
Yeah, I think we're almost up to 100 folks in that LinkedIn group. First of all, that is, just as a starting point, a great place to just know who's in the space. We've defined the sort of the affinity to education fairly broadly to include people who are in K-12 education, higher education, and also in education policy. And so those are the kind of the worlds that I think can interact really successfully there. And yeah, we invite people to post job openings, to post conferences. Recently, I was at the Society for Classical Learning out in at National Harbor. And so we all got connected on there and who's going to SCL, and had a little bit of a happy hour there with just Hillsdale grads. And so that's just another way that we're trying to help people connect and grow. And we're doing that in a bunch of other career areas. I think we've got law right now and finance. And I want to say healthcare is on deck as well.
Those are correct.
So I'm super excited about that. I invite all of our alums who are working in and around those spaces to reach out and connect. And if you'd like to start your own and you think you've got an idea, please come to us with that. In addition to that, Colleen's been doing some great work to help get some of the regional clubs going. And so we're just excited to see that as well. So these are all ways that we want alumni to be able to connect beyond Hillsdale and to engage with the school. Obviously, we'd love to see, alumni. I was just participating in the phone-a-thon past couple of days. Love to see alumni giving back in a meaningful way from a financial perspective, but we also want to see them engaging with the school in other ways. And so they all kind of work together. And I'm just glad that there's a real focus from Colleen's team on outreach, going out into the country to where students and alumni are. And I think it's making a big difference.
Well, I'm looking really forward to working with you. We've already been working together for a few years, but we've had some great luck with leadership on the board, but I can't think of many better to run the board. So I'm really excited to work with you, and I've already learned a lot from you and what you have to offer. So thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. It's a real pleasure.
So speaking of that, one thing that I've noticed about you, which I admire, because it's maybe a weakness on my part, so I admire it in you. But you're very, very good at strategic relationships, and sincere strategic relationships, and you've had to do it in your work, I imagine, a lot. You've kept them on campus here, not only to help us, but to benefit, I think your work in Texas and that kind of thing too. How do you do that so well and effectively?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate you saying it. I think it's one of those things that I kind of had to learn by necessity in some ways. When I was changing career, I had to look around to a lot of different organizations that were in the space and start to just kind of put myself out there to get to know people. And as I started to do that, I realized how open people are to get to know you if you just reach out and show a sincere interest in them. And I think I would say it kind of goes back to that. And then once I formed a relationship over here, I'd say, okay, well, they've got these objectives, they've got these goals. And this person over here, well, they have this similar thing, but they don't know each other. They should know each other. Mm-hmm. And so it just kind of started as a way to sort of bring people together that I liked and respected and that had similar goals, so that they could, multiply their efforts versus working in silos, which I think we do a lot in the, nonprofit space. There's reasons for that. There are incentives for that. But ultimately, I think it hurts our cause. And by cause, I mean the cause of truth seeking in the public square to segment ourselves too much from one another. Yes, we can have differences. Yes, we can have sincere policy disagreements. But ultimately, to combat, I think, the rising tide of true illiberalism on the other side, we need to have something attractive. And attractive ecosystems are ones that are welcoming, that don't gatekeep, and don't say, hey, we disagreed about this thing, so you're out permanently and we're never going to talk to you again. That's a way to divide and make your efforts smaller and not make them larger. And so I think it's a spirit of generosity we need to have, paired with a sense of conviction and recognizing that if we work together, we can accomplish more. So I think that's where that comes from.
All right. Well, I know that will also benefit the board and the alumni office and the alumni body. So we're grateful for that skill that you bring to the table. And in that vein, if you could kind of describe what we're looking for on the board for people that might be interested, we would love that.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to invite alumni who have a spirit of service to think about serving on the board. There are a number of ways you can serve in this community. First of all, through regional clubs that'll be getting up and running. There's going to be affinity group opportunities. The first thing I would say is just kind of surface yourself. Show yourself out there doing things to connect alums. That helps us to get to know you a little bit. Come to events so we can meet you. And by doing that, I think you're going to show other alums this is the way. So, if you make the first effort, and it's not very much of an effort because the school makes it really easy to engage, that's the first thing you should do. And so by showing service, by showing engagement, by going to events, by serving alums, you are already in the sort of pool of people we'd like to bring into the board. And so looking forward, that's essentially what we're looking for, is people who give their time, talent, and treasure to the college and are willing to talk about that to other alums, to bring them on board and enlist them in that as well. And so we're not looking for divas. We're not looking for people who are trying to make this about them or building their career, building their profile. We're looking for people with a true sense of mission. And that can come from any walk of life. That can be, you're retired and you've got time to give back. That can be you're a new mom and you see the need for how to engage other new moms in the life of the college. Really, any walk of life that you're pursuing with excellence, we're excited to have you as part of this board. And we'd invite you to, like I say, come to events, start reaching out and showing that leadership that we're looking for as we form those decisions. We've got 30 members on the board, and we're going to be doing some elections this time, and those happen basically every year. So,
very good. All right. Well, in wrapping up, you mentioned gratitude a couple times throughout, but what would you say is the single greatest thing about your Hillsdale experience for which you're grateful?
Well, I think it's probably what a lot of people would say about Hillsdale, which is that I never felt lost here. I never felt like I was just a number. Having come from a homeschool background, I think having a little bit of extra, attention was probably helpful because I did have a lot of study skills I needed to acquire.
Me too.
When I first got here.
Me too.
And I would say that's the main thing. The relationships that I was able to form with the faculty that were here and that are ongoing friendships have been so meaningful to me. And it was always a sense of they weren't just your teacher, they were a mentor, they were going to be a resource to you long after you had completed the class. And I would say that's one of the reasons I'm very grateful that we have the current academic advisor we have on the board, Joe Garnyops, who has been at the classics department for, I don't know, going on, I'm not going to say quarter of a century so far. And it's a great example of a faculty member who's always been willing to give back and be a mentor to students. And we've got so many of those professors here. And I love seeing that to this day. It hasn't changed. And that's the thing that I'm most grateful for.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing some of your story anyway with us and some of your wisdom. We've loved having you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank y'all.
All right. For Doug Goodnow, this is Colleen McGinnis. Thanking you for joining us on the White and Blue podcast. And may that spirit long remain.